Imagine a dense forest at dusk, the trees swaying like cathedral pillars, their shadows flickering in the wind. And within this forest, seraphic figures, ghostly and radiant, whispering forgotten names in ancient tongues. Their voices rise like a hymn, weaving together lost ballads, folk tales, and epic verses. This is how the Romantics saw the nation, not as a treaty, not as a law, but as a song that had always existed, waiting to be remembered. The Romantics wandered the ruins of castles, gathered peasant stories by firelight, and listened to the murmurs of rivers, believing that within these echoes lay the spirit of a people. In the last episode, we explored the mechanization of the state. In this episode, we step into its soul, where history is not written in statutes, but in poetry, myth, and longing. The idea of the nation didn't take on such a profound significance by chance. It had to be imagined first, wrapped in the language of destiny and grandeur, adorned with the symbols of the eternal. This was the work of poets, painters, composers, creators who conjured the illusion of an organic unity, who filled the air with the songs of belonging, who cast the land as sacred ground and its people as one great beating heart. Long before bureaucrats and armies laid claim to the land, the poets had already sung its boundaries into existence. The English Romantics, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron, painted their nation in verse, transforming fields and ruins into sacred relics. In Germany, Goethe's Faust wrestled with the idea of striving and nationhood, a restless pursuit of greatness entwined with the German soul. In Italy, the resurgence of Dante as a national poet gave the fragmented land an imagined unity. In France, Chateaubriand mourned the loss of monarchy, yet filled his works with the echoes of a France that still dreamed of grandeur. Sir Walter Scott in Scotland, Lermontov in Russia, and Mickiewicz in Poland. Their words became the emotional foundation of national consciousness. They turned landscapes into symbols, figures into legends, memories into destiny. Nations were not born in the halls of power, but in the pages of books, in the verses recited by candlelight, in the melodies that filled the streets. The Romantic movement which had its origins in the arts and philosophy, sought to reclaim what Enlightenment rationalism and scientific thought had overlooked: emotion, imagination, and the spiritual connections between people and their environment. For the Romantics, the world was not governed by cold, mechanistic laws, but by the invisible, organic forces that connected humanity to its roots, its history, language, and land. These ideas would fuel a vision of the nation-state that was deeply personal, collective, and in many ways mystical. At the heart of the Romantic nationalism was the belief that the nation was not simply a political structure or a convenient legal unit, but a living, breathing entity defined by the cultural, linguistic, and historical bonds that united its people. The state, in this view, was not a distant institution imposed from above, but a natural extension of the people's collective identity. National identity, in this sense, was not created through treaties or conquests, but was a reflection of the ancient, shared heritage of the people. Johann Gottfried Herder, a German philosopher and poet, was among the most influential thinkers in shaping this vision of the nation. Herder's concept of folksgeist, the spirit of the people, argued that every nation possessed a unique cultural essence which could be expressed through language, art, and traditions. For Herder, language was more than a medium of communication. It was the very vessel through which a nation's identity was forged. He believed that each language contained within it the history, values, and experiences of a people, and that by preserving language, the essence of the nation could be safeguarded. Herder's ideas gave rise to a cultural movement that saw the folk traditions of rural communities, songs, stories, customs, and dialects as the foundation of national identity. The Romantics began to turn their gaze away from the elite culture of monarchs and aristocrats and toward the common people. The rural peasant, the language they spoke, and the myths they shared became symbols of the nation's true, organic identity. In this sense, nationalism became a celebration of the past, of tradition, and of continuity. Qualities that stood in stark contrast to the revolutionary forces of the time. The idea of the nation as an organic, culturally defined entity found fertile ground in the political upheavals of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. The French Revolution had overthrown the monarchy and established the first modern republic, while the Napoleonic Wars had created a new political order across Europe. Amidst this turmoil, the question of what constituted a nation took on new urgency. In Germany, the fragmented political landscape of countless small states and principalities was slowly coalescing around the idea of a unified German nation. Intellectuals such as Friedrich Schlegel and poets such as Goethe championed the idea that the German people, united by their language and cultural heritage, had the right to a unified state. The division of Germany, they argued, was a historical anomaly that could no longer be tolerated. National unity was seen as not only a political necessity but a cultural imperative, an expression of the folksgeist that defined the German people. In Italy, too, the ideas of romantic nationalism found traction. The Italian peninsula, long divided and under the control of foreign powers such as Austria and Spain, was beginning to coalesce around the idea of a unified Italian nation. Figures such as Giuseppe Mazzini and the poet Alessandro Manzoni called for the creation of an Italian state based on shared language, culture, and history of the Italian people. Mazzini in particular saw the unification of Italy not merely as a political act, but as a moral and spiritual necessity. To him, the Italian nation was a living entity, one that was bound by a common destiny and had a sacred obligation to fulfill its potential. In England, too, Romantic nationalism began to take root in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, as poets, novelists, and philosophers sought to define national identity in new ways. Thinkers like William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and Sir Walter Scott embraced the idea that a nation was more than just a political entity. It was a living, breathing organism, deeply connected to the land, its history, and its people. For the Romantics, English identity was not simply shaped by political structures, but by a collective memory and spiritual bond to the past. Wordsworth, for example, celebrated the natural beauty of England as a reflection of the nation's soul, while Scott's historical novels romanticized the medieval past, blending folklore with history to create a sense of national pride. This vision of a shared cultural heritage gave rise to a national consciousness that transcended class and division, uniting the people through stories, traditions, and common history. Yet, this idealized notion of a unique English identity also played a role in justifying Britain's imperial ambitions as Romantic nationalism became entwined with the country's global dominance. The influence of Romantic nationalism was not confined to Germany and Italy. Across Europe, from Poland to Greece, movements for national sovereignty began to take shape, drawing on the ideas of a shared cultural heritage and a deep connection between people and land. In Poland, for instance, poets like Adam Mickiewicz and Julius Slowacki used the language of Romantic nationalism to inspire their compatriots to resist foreign occupation and revive the Polish nation's cultural legacy. The Polish national identity was seen as intrinsically linked to its folk traditions and language, and its fight for independence became a struggle not only for political freedom, but for the preservation of its national soul. In Greece, the struggle for independence from the Ottoman Empire was framed as a fight to restore the nation's Hellenistic heritage. The Greek War of Independence was imbued with Romantic ideals as revolutionaries sought to revive the glory of ancient Greece and reclaim their cultural and historical legacy. The notion of the Greek nation was deeply entwined with the idea of restoring the greatness of its classical past, creating a national identity that was both timeless and modern. Romantic nationalism's enchantment lies in its ability to elevate the idea of the nation to a realm beyond reason, beyond political treaties or social contracts. It gave nations a soul, but it also left them vulnerable to forces that would seek to define that soul in narrow, exclusive terms. The same poets and artists who helped construct a shared sense of identity also painted the nation in a way that could only exist by excluding those who did not fit into its mythic narrative. It is easy to be enchanted by the Romantic vision, to be swept up in its grandeur, but there is something troubling beneath the beauty. For all their lyricism, the Romantics offered not reason, but feeling. They did not justify the nation state. They made it sacred. They dressed it in nostalgia and myth, in the aching longing for a past that had never existed quite as they imagined it. Romanticism, with its celebration of the nation as organic, mystical entity, aimed to transcend individualism and unite people through shared history, culture, and destiny. Yet, in its glorification of the nation, it paradoxically reinforced the very boundaries it sought to transcend. What began as a movement to dissolve the limitations of the individual and embrace the collective, universal spirit eventually fixed people within rigid national identities defined by ethnicity, language, and geography. This creates a profound philosophical contradiction. A movement that sought to unify humanity through transcendent ideals ended up constructing artificial divisions. But can a philosophical ideal that contradicts its own logic and relies so heavily on feeling rather than understanding still be the one we follow in the modern world? Can the emotional foundations of romantic nationalism hold against the weight of reason, history, and the complexities of our time? Climate change, if nothing else, makes one truth undeniable. The fate of the world is shared, not separate. Rising seas don't recognize sovereignty, nor do pandemics respect borders. The idea that our future lies in isolation within the confines of borders now seems a dream we can no longer afford to nurture. In an age where the internet dissolves distances, where commerce flows unhindered, and where crises demand collective action, does it still make sense to uphold the nation-state with the near religious fervor of a romantic ideal? Perhaps the romantic idea of the nation was necessary once, a scaffolding upon which emerging societies built their sense of self. But has it outlived its time? Can we still afford to organize ourselves around a vision born of poetry and longing when the demands of the present and the weight of the future ask something very different of us? In the next episode, we will see how this poetic nationalism transformed into the dominant force of the modern world, fueling revolutions, shaping empires, and ultimately defining the borders of the world we live in today. The poets lit the match, but who fanned the flames?